All right, welcome back to the playbook. I'm very excited today to have a very special guest, a titan of the industry, as I would say. He would laugh at saying that, but he really is.
He
Uh,
is.
Eric Bechtel, CEO of IdeaQuest. Eric, thanks for joining me, man. I appreciate it.
Taylor, good to see you. Great to be on the playbook with you today. This, we got, what do they call it? A cycle bomb, blizzard here in the Northeast, dumping 2 feet of snow here in New Jersey. So it's a nice work from home day. So the timing of the podcast couldn't have been better.
Good. If you look at your background, it looks like you're at the beach.
Yeah, well, I do live in Jersey, so it's a little reminder of the Jersey Shore in the summertime. So
There you go. Well, no, look, you've had quite a storied career, and I don't want to ruin it for everyone, but you founded IdeaQuest in 2001. If you could take me back to what you were doing prior to that, before you started IdeaQuest, and all the multitude of experience you've had, and then I want to see, as you started IdeaQuest in 2001, what problem were you solving?
Well, I started my career out of grad school working at the WWF in the late 80s for Vince McMahon. I was very fortunate enough to go through Ohio University's sports administration program, which a lot of leaders in the industry have come out of. One of those people was Basil DeVito, who was working for Vince, running all the marketing for the WWF. And I got one of the greatest jobs right out of grad school, catching the rise of Hulkamania, and Vince taking what was then a regional product into a national product, into a global product. He had that vision back then in the late 80s. You see what it's become today, which is amazing. I got there kind of on the ground floor of the early days of that growth. So it was a great learning experience, great opportunity to travel globally and work with a lot of great people like David Hill when he was running Sky Sports before he came over, and built Fox Sports for Rupert Murdoch, because that was one of our first broadcast partners for the WWF over in England. And what brought me to New Jersey after 5 years at the WWF was getting on the ground floor of Integrated Sports International. Frank Vuno, who obviously was just honored by the Sports Business Journal as one of their champions last year, had the idea and a lot of support from NFL owners and agents to start a marketing agency when it wasn't what the industry is today. And to be able to get on the ground floor of that, be early to selling naming rights, doing marketing deals from, the top quarterbacks in the NFL, because Frank started the NFL Quarterback Club, to working with, superstars like Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal. It was just a great opportunity to learn the marketing side of the industry versus the entertainment side, which was the focus of, when I was at the WWF. And we kind of caught lightning in a bottle, and we sold it in 1999 to Bob Sillerman when he was rolling up the industry. Fortunate enough that, David Falk, which was his first acquisition, made ISI the second acquisition. And there was about 17 that happened over an 18-month period. And, the talent that we had amassed at SFX Sports, while brief for me, because, I didn't stay after the sale to Clear Channel, but there was amazing talent that was within that sports group. And had it stayed together, the glue of that is, some of the people who are running the biggest agencies in the industry today, like Mike Levine at CAA Sports, and, a whole bunch of others, the guys at Rubicon, Jordan Bejant, who's at Fox Sports now. It was just a great, group of talent. So I've just been very fortunate. And, right after Sillerman sold the Clear Channel, all the partners pretty much had an out in their contract. And at the time, I was the youngest of all the partners, and I didn't want to be part of a big corporate conglomerate. I think they were more interested in the music and the concert business than they were the sports. we were the marketing side. So we weren't agents at ISI, which was really the piece of the business that Clear Channel wanted. So I had an opportunity to kind of go out and figure out what I was going to do next. And, right after 9/11, I was fortunate enough during my ISI tenure to work with Dale Earnhardt Sr. And, long story, because I can't believe, last Sunday was the 25th anniversary of his passing at the Daytona 500, which I was at, unfortunately. I had an opportunity to work with Teresa Earnhardt and the staff there to try to build out the sales and marketing infrastructure for Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, which at the time included, basically representing and selling, the rights to Dale Earnhardt Jr. So it was too good of an opportunity not to kind of go out and start my own agency. So when you can start something with a client like that, I thought I was catching lightning in a bottle. And, here we are 25 years later, still helping our clients, generate big ideas, driving value, growing sales and market share. So it's been a pretty good ride for the last 25 years.
I love the story you tell, and if you could tell it real quick of how much this industry has changed in 25 years. And you calling up Dale Earnhardt Enterprises and saying, or Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, excuse me, and saying, I'd like to talk to Dale Earnhardt. Yeah.
I didn't even do that. I actually, at one of our first major consulting clients that I brought into ISI was Burger King. And we worked for two amazing marketers, Paul Clayton and John Sywinski, who went on to do amazing things for major brands. And, at the time, McDonald's had basically everything. They had the Olympics, they had all the major sports leagues. And John and Paul had a vision to utilize sports marketing. It was a cold call that I had made, to John Sywinski. And, that got our foot in the door with Burger King. And when we were looking at the landscape, there were two opportunities that we thought were ripe for them. One was NASCAR and one was college football. And so they ended up hiring us, and we built out a strategy around both of those, which at the time with NASCAR, there was a huge rivalry going on between Dale Earnhardt, who, was the intimidator, and this young kid, Jeff Gordon, who was the pretty boy Hollywood guy. Right. And so we said, look, if you're going to get into NASCAR, let's create a campaign around Dale and Jeff Gordon. And so they bid on it, and, we're like, okay, they gave us the green light to go secure them. And so the first phone call I made was Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. I called and introduced myself and just said, hey, we have a client that's very interested in potentially becoming a sponsor or having Dale Earnhardt as an endorser. Is there someone I could talk to? And this is, of course, early mid-90s. And of course, the Garage Mahal hadn't been built. Dale Earnhardt Incorporated was a little brick house down in Mooresville, North Carolina. And so I was put on hold for 5 minutes by the receptionist. And all of a sudden, somebody picked up the phone and said, this is Dale, how can I help you? And I said, well, and I went to say who I was. I didn't really pick up the fact that he said it was Dale. I said, Dale, I'm looking to, talk to, we represent Burger King, and this is our agency, and we want to do a national campaign. And then I very quickly realized it was actually Dale Earnhardt, because he was the sales and marketing arm for Dale Earnhardt Incorporated. And it was just a surreal moment. And he said, after hearing my pitch for 5-10 minutes, he said, all right, well, why don't you come down to Mooresville, North Carolina next week, and let's have a conversation. So that's how the relationship started. To this day, he's one of the best people I ever did business with. If you shook his hand, you had a deal. He was brilliant, for somebody who wasn't, I think dropped out of high school, didn't even go to college. He was just wise beyond his years. And, that started, what was an awesome partnership, with Burger King and Dale Earnhardt Incorporated, which included Dale Jr., Dale, The Jeff Gordon piece, ironically, a little side note to that one. Jeff was on board. We're going to build this campaign and had sent the contracts out. And the day that I sent the contract to Jeff, he called me and he said, "Hey, Eric, it's Jeff." He goes, "Listen," he goes, "I got your contract yesterday." He goes, "But I got to be honest with you." He goes, "I'm in Atlanta right now and I'm about to walk into the headquarters at Coca-Cola and, and let them know that I'm leaving and I'm signing with Pepsi. And, I really want to do this deal, with Burger King and Dale, but I think, because Burger King was a Coca-Cola.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he goes, "I'm not sure if that's going to screw up the deal, but it might." And I said, "Yeah, I think it might." And, so long story short, we didn't get the Jeff Gordon piece done. And we just went all in on Dale and Dale Earnhardt Incorporated and his vision for building out, the race shop and ultimately bringing, Dale Jr. into Cup. So it was a pretty awesome relationship. And I couldn't have had a better founding client for IdeaQuest, in my opinion. So it worked out.
Did that really help? As you mentioned, you didn't want to go work for a big corporation, and did that really help? Supplant you in the industry in regards of going out on your own? Because again, for me, my first year was, I just finished my first year. I'm on my second year in my own shop, and I think there's always that first year of saying, well, is this right? Should I go back to this? Should I go back more structure? Did that really help you make that decision of, okay, we're putting the chips in the mill and we're going all in here?
I think it was more, I didn't know what I didn't know, but at the time, I was 32 years old. We had a great ride at ISI, being in the early days, when you had 10 people in the office and you're pulling all-nighters to go pitch, brands to do an NFL deal. And, those were some of the funnest years of my career. And so, the industry then is not what it is today, in terms of the mega agencies and the holding companies. So it was a lot easier for me to say, well, shit, that was a lot of fun, and I'm only 32 years old and just got married and have a baby. And, if there's ever a time in my life to do something like this, it might as well be now. Because, if it doesn't work out, then I'll just throw my resume out there and go get a job with a team or a league and, bring my talents that way. And, I think it's a matter of timing. I kind of grew the agency as the industry grew. And, the reason why we started ISI is because when Frank left NFL Properties, he was like, man, these brands are spending tens of millions of dollars and we don't do anything to help them. Like, they need help. And that was the whole genesis for starting, Integrated Sports International. So when kind of all the agencies blew up inside of SFX Sports, because I had such a big role in bringing in corporate consulting clients and kind of overseeing that division, I just said, you know what, I want to go help Fortune 500 brands with their investments across the industry, because they need strategy, they need ideation, they need help negotiating to get the best deals and the right assets. And so it was pretty simple, from a business model standpoint, to kind of, use that as the foundation for IdeaQuest.
No, that's so interesting that you talk about how the industry has such change into the, mega conglomerates, holding companies, et cetera. How have your agency stood the test of time over the last 25 years when those things, when the IMGs, WMEs, Endeavors, CAs have popped up and really taken a, lion's share of some of the, bigger enterprise clients, right? Like the Amexes, AT&Ts. How has IdeaQuest kind of stood the test of time, and how have you, maybe made a little, change in how you do things as the industry has changed too?
It's a great question. I talk to Vito and a lot of my peers in the industry all the time. First and foremost, there's enough business out there for all of us. the focus shifts a little bit. I am not going to waste my time and energy and my ideas, participating in RFPs against the big agencies. And, we all have the same friends that are running leagues, that are doing, working for owners. And, when those RFPs pop up, it's usually because the league's landed a big deal. They got a brand. They don't necessarily have an agency. So league execs are recommending, hey, put these 5 agencies into your RFP pitch and have at it. And then they beat the crap out of each other. And ultimately somebody wins. And it's usually another agency's idea that is given to the winning agency. So, but what it helped me focus on was there's plenty of what I would call tier 2 or tier 3 brands or leagues that need help. Or more importantly, where I've had a lot of successes with challenger brands. So maybe a brand that's 3, 4, 5, 6 in their category, that the big agencies, aren't going to waste their time on, because they want the guys that are spending the $1 billion marketing budgets, because that's their model. So because I'm kind of a boutique, agency by choice, it allows me to go after a completely different set of brands. And, we've taken brands like American Family Insurance, and when we started working with them 20 years ago, no one had even heard of them, because they were a regional brand, but they utilized, sports marketing as a core, tenant within their marketing, division to build a national brand. And ultimately, after acquiring a bunch of companies like The General and others, they went from being a regional brand that no one knew to a national brand, doing naming rights and huge brand ambassador deals and starting, a PGA golf tournament. So there's a lot of opportunity out there in the industry. And so, the other part of it is, I've kind of done it in a very stealth way, like flying under the radar, because, if you know what you're doing, you can build a really nice business. And, your office can be one town over, where you have the 5-minute commute, and, you get to, work with, people that you like and, that you choose. And you don't have all the headaches, when you're building a bigger agency. So, or you're part of a holding company and you got to answer to a whole bunch of other people. So between that and just having, 40 years of a Rolodex, and, the guys that I was out there, pounding the pavement with in my early sales days, they're now sitting in the C-suites, so when you could get those phone calls, texts, and emails answered a lot quicker than most, and you're working with a challenger brand, that's a tremendous amount of value that you're bringing to that C-suite, because they could never get those phone calls returned, or they could never get those opportunities, and so it's worked out. Is it getting more competitive? Listen, I think there's a handful of agencies that are, my size, that have been around for over 2 decades, so, there's definitely a space for it. I've resisted, selling, because I just never wanted to do it. I kind of like where I sit.
Yeah, of course.
I'm comfortable, with where we are, and, we're doing deals just as big as CAA Sports and all, William Morris and all the big agencies out there. So we're just doing it with a different client base.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love the thought of challenger brands, and that's kind of what I'm trying to do with challenger leagues and teams. I mean, look, you're known for relationships. What do relationships actually do in a deal, and what can't they do in a deal?
Well, listen, the whole industry is based on relationships, and in terms of deal making, I think it's the level of trust. And I hate to keep going back to different people, but like, we were working with Land's End, that wanted to do some brand ambassador work, because they saw what we were doing with American Family Insurance, and they'd reached out to us because they're another Wisconsin-based brand. I've done a lot of business in Wisconsin for some reason. I should
Great state.
I
Great
should have
state of
I should have
Wisconsin.
a second home there with all the business we've done with Schranz. But when we went through the whole process of vetting the type of brand ambassador they were looking for, it went across sports and entertainment. And the one that really stuck out was, that really piqued their interest was Blake Shelton. And I've never met Blake Shelton. I have no idea, who his agent is, but I know Mike Levine, who runs CAA Sports. So I just called Vino up and said, hey, I need to get introduced to Blake Shelton's agent because I think we got a deal, a pretty big opportunity. And fast forward, in 3 phone calls, Blake Shelton signing, a multi-million-dollar, multi-year, brand ambassador deal to build a big and tall line of clothes with Land's End, which had a very unique vision for how they wanted to go up after that particular customer. That deal doesn't happen. I don't get hired, unless Vino connects me with somebody in his ecosystem, because, and that's where we always joke, there's plenty of business out there for all of us. They won, IdeaQuest won, Land's End won, Blake Shelton won, and so that's the value of networking and relationships. I mean, I wouldn't have made it this long if it wasn't. But at the end of the day, the flip side of that is, relationships aren't going to get the deal done, so, they may get you in the door, but then it's going to come down to, hey, is the idea big enough? Is the value prop going to be there? And, can you make the personal connection, to actually get, the ink on the contract? So, but, I've kind of used my Rolodex and my relationships within the industry to get me in the door. And I'm pretty comfortable once I get in the door, being a people person, treating people nice. I learned a unbelievable, one of my favorite stories is when I had a brief period of time working with Rory McIlroy, and I got to know his dad. And I was having a conversation with him after he won his first major at Congressional, which is on Father's Day, the US Open. And we celebrated all night. It was one of the funnest nights of my life. But I remember having a conversation with him in the wee hours of the morning. And he just said, look, I said, you've raised an amazing son. Rory's the best. And I just said, your bond with him is incredible. He said, look, he goes, Eric, we always told Rory growing up as a kid is it doesn't cost a nickel to be nice. And that just really stuck with me because, that's the truth. If you're nice to people and being a boutique agency and also not representing talent, we're Switzerland. So,
Right.
I got to call Ari Emanuel or Mike Levine or anybody who's in that business to say, I got a deal for you. They're not going to be threatened by me because I'm bringing the brand that they don't represent. So, but you got to be able to have, the idea and the value proposition in order to close it. But the relationships make it really valuable because that's what I pitch when I walk into a CEO's office. I'm going to be like, hey, look, I'm going to reduce your timeline to get this done based on the relationships. That's why a company like, Johnson Controls, which is a Fortune 70 company, hired IdeaQuest. It was because I could take that C-suite direct to, league commissioners or owners that were building stadiums and mixed use environments and make that direct introduction. So they could tell their story, their proposition, versus, them trying to go through the general contractors and, the owner reps and doing the 3 bids and a buy. So, once we proved that, it became, an amazing relationship and great case study for IdeaQuest, but that is exactly what we did. We condensed their sales, cycle and built a pretty robust sales pipeline for them just by going direct, versus trying to do it the way they were doing it, which, was new to them. So,
yeah, of course. I want to talk about another big deal that you've done and a big personality. And again, I hate you to ask, telling all these stories, but I think they're so fascinating about, American Family Insurance Insurance was a regional brand, and they ended up buying the General. And a very big sports personality had the General as their first ever car insurance and didn't even know it. And that's why he's in some of the ads. But could you talk a little bit about Shaq, the General, that story you told me about bringing him to dinner? And
Yeah, no, he's, well, we were fortunate enough at ISI to work with Leonard Armato, who was Shaquille's original agent. And, we had worked on some small, endorsement marketing campaigns and got to know him personally. Fast forward, when Shaquille left Leonard at the end of his playing career, he hired Perry Rogers. And, Perry and I became very good friends. And, just through the industry. And, fast forward, American Family Insurance buys the General. And, I had been, well aware because Shaquille had shared this story that, when he was at LSU, he was given a Ford 150 truck by an alumni. He was really excited. He called his dad. His dad told him, you better not drive that truck until you get insurance. And he's like, Dad, what's insurance? And he said, you're a smart man. You'll figure it out. And of course, Shaquille, was watching daytime television, saw the commercial with the General driving the little red Corvette, calls the 800 number, gets an insurance policy. Very, he tells that story himself. So I happen to know that story. So fast forward, American Family Insurance is doing a national sales conference. They're honoring their top 5 sales guys. CEO said, hey, is there any way you could get Shaquille to come host this dinner with me? Because we want to honor these, great agents. And of course, I knew the story and knew the relationship. So I called Perry and I said, Perry, listen, I need a favor. And you got to get Shaquille to come to this dinner for me down in Miami, but I think it could turn into an opportunity. And so fast forward, Shaquille agrees to do it. He picks me up, at the Lowe's Hotel. We drive down to Prime 112 where we're having this private dinner. And, Shaquille's sitting next to the CEO, Jack Salzwedel, American Family Insurance. And they're having dinner. And of course, business comes up. And, Shaquille asked Jack, how's business going? He mentions, hey, we just recently bought the General Insurance. You probably don't know them. He goes, you mean the little dude in the red Corvette? And Jack goes, you know the General? And he immediately breaks out into singing the jingle from the commercial, which everyone's familiar with. And it was like a golden moment because once you have an authentic story like that with someone of Shaquille's, ilk, it becomes a no-brainer, as I like to say in our business. When you have a no-brainer, and sometimes it's a stadium naming rights deal with the right brand and the right team in the right part of the country. And you sit there and go, of course that deal happens. It's a no-brainer. This was a no-brainer. And, Jack looked across the dinner table at me and he goes, we got to sign this guy. So, and that's led to a very, very successful relationship for both parties, for the last 10 plus years.
Now, did he still have the General as insurance as he was Shaq? Like,
he did keep the General. Shaquille has a lot of vehicles.
Oh, sure. No, of course.
But he did. And that was also led to if you know anything about Shaquille O'Neal, and I think this comes across in all the articles and what Perry helped him do building his brand post-career, is he will not do an endorsement deal with any product that he doesn't believe in. And it was really a brilliant move on Perry's part. Obviously, they went and sold, I think 51% of his brand to Authentic, and now Authentic's, taking that model that was built, but, it was the authenticity. And so those are the only type of partners that Shaquille likes to partner with. And he really doesn't care. He doesn't want to know what the deal terms are. He always goes, nah, like this, because he doesn't want to know. Obviously, he makes a lot of money. He's making way more money now post-career than he was making during his career. And, he's got a vision to become a billion, have a brand worth over $1 billion. I think he's going to be the next athlete that crosses that threshold. He's not far away. He's got great business partners. So, once again, it was a fun one. It was an easy one. And it's one of those kind of cool case studies when the General started when AmFam originally purchased them 2012, 2013. It was a $300 million brand. AmFam just sold the General a year and a half ago to Century Insurance for 1.7 billion. So, I think Shaquille and what he brought to that brand is a big part of the success of the growth of the General Insurance.
And, I think to break down, because I think people are interested in, again, the whole point of this podcast is kind of go behind the curtain. And if you could, why do brands such as, unsexy brands, right? Like insurance companies, et cetera, how important is that celebrity endorser to their overall marketing strategy? And how do they, differentiate themselves from other insurance companies that can offer same rates, same terms? How important is it to get that celebrity endorser, whether, or not it's one, multiple? I mean, how important is that into their marketing strategy?
It's funny because, American Family Insurance is, one of the biggest reasons for the success of IdeaQuest, obviously. Insurance is not a sexy category. It's not a sexy product. Nobody talks about it. When you look at the category in general, it's like creatures, critters, and characters, right? So when you look at the Geicos and the Progressives and, the current president at American Family Insurance, Talisa Yancey, who was actually one of my clients at Burger King. So when you talk about
Oh, wow.
networking and relationships,
Yeah, of course.
when she went to American Family Insurance in Madison, Wisconsin, I had never heard of it. And when she told me she was in Madison, Wisconsin, working for American Family Insurance, I'm like, never heard of it. Like, what do you do? Like, but she really had the vision to build an insurance brand based around protecting what's most valuable to an individual, which is their dreams. And dreams are very broad. It could be your first home, it could be your wedding, it could be sending your kids to college. Like, what are your most valuable assets? What are your dreams? And she came up with this dream campaign. And the brilliance of that campaign is it tied so well into sports marketing. So when we started talking to athletes and entertainers about it, I have a commercial with JJ Watt, Kevin Durant, and Derek Jeter. And why would those three guys? All right, JJ grew up in Wisconsin. He's a Wisconsin guy. He actually was an American Family Insurance, as was his family. So very familiar with the brand. But Kevin Durant, Derek Jeter, but what do those guys have, and what did they aspire to be the best of the best? It was chasing their dreams. So it made a natural connection, and it allowed us to go out and talk to anybody. And so that's where, the power of a really big idea in a category that's not sexy, that most people don't want to talk about, don't understand. But that's the power of marketing. And, once again, it's like catching lightning in a bottle. And we went out and, I could go on and on about the list of athletes and entertainers that American Family worked with. Philip Phillips, who won American Idol, because of, the music, and Jennifer Hudson and, Usher. And I could go, why would those people want anything to do? And it was all centered around, everybody has dreams that they want to pursue. And that's what makes what we do, Taylor, a lot of fun. That's why I like being on the agency side. I like being on I'm not a creative guy like all my clients. Like, I'm always throwing out crazy ideas, and they're like, "Hey, you got us in the room." But I love the creative process. Right. Love, getting the right people in the room and coming up with that no-brainer idea that says, "Boy, this makes a lot of sense." And it's been fun.
Do you think, talk about no-brainer ideas, do you think that once you can sell something conceptually to these brands in terms of those big ideas, and the dollar amount is, as long as it's quote unquote inside the, uprights, Was there a lot of pushback sometimes on dollar amount, or is it saying, hey, this is a great idea? Yeah, we might spend a little bit more money than we want to, but at the end of the day, this helps the brand immensely more than, I mean, as you said, going from 300 million to 1.7. At the end of the day, what's 5 million to Shaq or 10? How money?
I'm going to go back to one of my first bosses, which was Vince McMahon. And one of the most valuable lessons I ever learned from him is he said, Eric, if you have $2 in your pocket, spend five.
I love that.
And you know, I had to sit on that one for a little bit of time, but it was like the best CEOs and CMOs that I've worked with in the span of my career have always told me the same thing. There is no limit on a budget around a big idea. And it was actually one of the reasons why we came up with the name IdeaQuest for the agency, because it's, big ideas always win. So it's the search, for the big idea. And if you have a big idea and you get the right people in the room, but the best executives I've ever worked for said, if you bring me the idea, the big idea, I'll find you the money. And because they can take it from this bucket into this bucket, and, is there a limit on too much? Sure. I've done a lot of naming rights deals in my career. I've been fortunate enough to do them on both the buy side and the sell side, because I've represented, owners around, especially at ISI, because we were kind of early to the table. It does get to a point where, we were negotiating a naming rights deal with Arthur Blank and his team around the new stadium that was being built. And AmFam was the lead horse throughout the whole process. And there was a lot of interest, but Mercedes came in with a really big number that was way bigger than ours, and obviously a global brand. And, we weren't going to go there. And we pivoted, and we ended up being a founding partner doing the kit with the United.
That's great.
Around a budget that worked more for us, that they weren't going to stretch to win a deal, so sometimes, it does get priced out. When we first started working with Johnson Controls, I was introduced to the CEO by Peter Fagan, who was running the Milwaukee Bucks. And Peter was trying to do the naming rights because he really wanted a Wisconsin-based Milwaukee company to put their name on the building. Because he knew their incumbent wasn't going to pay the amount of money that they were looking for. So once again, I'm going to go back to networking and friends. And, if Peter doesn't make that intro to Alex Molinaroli, who was the CEO at the time, and Kim Kupris Metcalf, who was the CMO, I never do any business with Johnson Controls. So he said, I have a friend who's has done a lot of these deals. You need to talk to him, because he called me and said, these guys don't know what they're doing. They need your help. And so we started the whole process. And at the end of the day, the amount of money that Peter was asking for didn't make sense for the market and everything else. And, we had to tell our clients, look, we don't think it's worth that, but, here's plan B. Let's become their first founding partner, and let's get to the table before they put the shovels in the dirt, so you can integrate all your technology into the original plan. And we became the first founding partner well before they ever found Pfizer to do the naming rights. And it was just economics. And it created a win-win. Peter ended up getting the deal that he wanted at the number that he wanted from Pfizer, and Johnson Controls got an unbelievable deal to be a core technology partner, and integrate into all the plans. And it literally became their living global showcase as a global company, because they would bring their customers, because up until that point, they were in the guts of 50% of the stadiums and arenas around the world, but they didn't have anything like Pfizer Forum. So now they had this living, breathing, and it expanded into the Deer District, which is where the future was going, where billions and billions of dollars, I think it's 15 billion this year, in that space. And we were way in front of that, back in the, 2015, 2016, 2017. So sometimes the price point does get too high where it makes sense for the brand, but you just got to try to pivot and, find what the solution is. So I define IdeaQuest as a sales and marketing solutions agency. I don't say sports marketing or entertainment. It's about sales and solutions. So if you can't get the deal that the brand wants, then what's the solution going to be? If you can't go plan A, what is plan B going to be that can deliver just as much value? And that's what we try to focus on.
I want to talk about another really fun, you know, big changing organization that you're working with, ForgiveCo. Could you give a little background on ForgiveCo and what you guys are looking to do here coming up in 250th anniversary of America?
It's I got to say, this is one of my favorite clients that I've ever worked with in my career, and it's because of what they do, not because what I make, working with them. But a couple years ago, I came across an interview that Josh Allen was doing as part of his Walter Payton Man of the Year platform, and he was wiping out $10 million of debt for families in Buffalo, Wyoming, where he went to college, in his hometown in California. And I was really blown away because I was confused. I was like, how the hell is he doing this?
Right.
Because I know, even though he signed his new contract, I knew he wasn't writing a check for $10 million. So fast forward, do the research. He partnered with ForgiveCo. I had never heard about the company, literally cold called, and set up a Zoom with Craig and Eric and Tico, which is a father-son. And they told me that they were building a new vertical in the industry around debt forgiveness. Craig had spent 30 plus years in the debt business, and that industry is typically, debt collectors are going in and they're buying this debt, that's sitting, with debt companies, and then, they're banging the phones, trying to collect whatever they can for more than they bought the debt for. And that can be a brutal business, because, people who are in debt, and there's a lot of people that are in debt, are hurting. And, fast forward, Eric had spent 12 years at IMG, mainly on the college side, but, definitely had that background in sports marketing. And they're sitting around a family dinner table one night, and they're talking, there's got to be a better way to do this. And so they decided to launch ForgiveCo and say, you know what, we're going to partner with leagues and brands and athletes and celebrities. And instead of collecting debt, we're going to wipe it out as an act of kindness. And it just really struck me. I was like, I got to work with you guys. I love this. And, so for the better part of the last 2.5 years, we've been out trying to educate everybody in the industry about what they're doing. And, this past year, due to a lot of hard work on Eric's side, excuse me, he was talking to the Pittsburgh Steelers, and, Verizon had come to them saying, hey, we're looking for a really good community activation platform, and we got a brand, Verizon, that wants an idea. And so fast forward, they came up with wiping out $100,000 in debt for every win in Pittsburgh that the Steelers had.
Oh, wow.
For veterans. And it was just a simple engagement. He had the Josh Allen case study. And of course, the Steelers won like their first 9 or 10 games that year. So it got a ton of earned media. It really kind of blew up inside of Verizon. Other regional presidents started saying, hey, we want to do that. And, this past year, I think Verizon activated it with 8 or 9 of their NFL partners, a couple NBA teams, NHL team. And it gave us a lot of legitimacy. They partnered with Roger Penske around the Indy 500 and the Colts, and they wiped out $6 million in debt around the Indy 500, which was really cool. So, fast forward, we're sitting there with, America's 250 coming up, and how much focus there is on it from the White House, knowing that all the leagues, are being asked to get behind it, as are brands. And we said, well, look, there's 250 million in veteran debt, out there in the world. And, obviously it's a leading cause of mental health, when people are in debt. Why don't we go partner, with a league or a brand, and say, let's wipe out all 250 million on, is paying back the people who made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms in this country as a gift for the celebration of America's 250. So for the last, 3 or 4 months, we were out there talking to leagues and teams and owners, and we're going to try to make it happen.
That's fantastic. I mean, I think ForgiveCo of as you look at a sector of the brand, right, of what they're doing, there's nobody else like it. And for them to only, I mean, they've only started that pretty recently, like 2-3 years ago, right?
I mean, even though Craig's been in the business, they are a public benefit corp. That was the pivot. He got away from the 501c3 because with a 501c3, you could only focus on medical debt, and there's so much more other types of debt. And that's why it became important to partner with brands or leagues or owners or celebrities, because, they're doing this, they're making money while they're doing it, but it was a brand new vertical, but and we've done dozens of campaigns, with Born Primitive, Black Rifle Coffee, wiping out 25 million around a 4-day Veterans Day weekend, just people buying online at those two brands. Because it's a way to give back to veterans, and it doesn't have to be veterans. The thing I love about it is it could be all Americans. It could be first responders. It could be single mothers. It could be people who have, mortgage problems or can't pay their telephone bills. There's a lot of debt across America. And so they have created a brand new vertical. It doesn't exist. And when we go back to saying challenger brands or just unique brands, they became a perfect client, for us, and, the relationships that I have in the industry. Eric has a lot in his 12 years at IMG, but we got to tell the story faster. And the more successful case studies we have, the easier it is becoming for us to get in the right doors. And, that's what we're focused on right now.
No, I love that. And that's so great that, that company's doing it along with yourself. Last segment. You good on time?
Yeah, I'm great.
Okay,
dude, it's a snow day here in New Jersey. So
it's a snow day. It's a snow day. Yeah. See, that's why I live in Vegas, because there's snow here.
I don't blame you. I could. It would be nice to swing the golf clubs right now. So yeah. I'm getting Jones for it. That's for sure.
I might play golf this week. So while I feel bad, but if you want to come out to Vegas. Okay, we're gonna do a speed round. I'm gonna ask you a question. You're gonna give me the answer. We're gonna do six of these prompts.
Okay.
Most overrated metric in sponsorship.
Most overrated metric in sponsorship. Return on investment.
Oh, I love that. Most underrated asset in sports business.
Personal relationships.
One negotiation rule you never break.
One negotiation rule I never break. Not keeping my word.
Biggest red flag in a brand partner.
Egos.
I love that. Best way to create urgency without discounting.
Authenticity.
And one prediction for the next 18 months in sports partnership.
AI is not going to ruin the sports industry.
Look at these. These. Okay, let's go back to one of them I want to talk to you about, which you just said. There's been a lot of talk about AI. And again, I was talking to somebody the other day about, they're like, do you have, this person to do stuff for you and this person to do? I'm like, no, I have ChatGPT and Claude, right, to do some of that AI stuff, and it only helps me. But so many people are saying the sky's falling with AI and everything. Tell me about it. I mean, in your 25 years of business, I'm sure there's been, from technology to, I remember when DraftKings and FanDuel had that buying spree, and then it came, for fantasy, and then it went over to sports betting, and now it's the Kalshi poly markets. And then, so, I mean, for you, do you think that AI, number one, I think it's here to stay. And I don't think, and if you think differently, please tell me. But how has AI as a category kind of, does that look similar to other categories that have been in the past of something that's really, really hot? I mean, yeah, crypto's like, I remember a few years ago, FTX and the whole crypto craze was, was also another thing in terms of how much money they were spending in partnerships. But from an AI standpoint, how do you see them working with teams and brands, and not taking away, but only adding and benefiting?
Yeah, I don't think AI is going anywhere, obviously. I don't think it's like crypto, or, FanDuel, like in the poly markets. But, at the end of the day, the sports industry and business is about the personal connection, the live event experience. Yeah, I mean, that's what you're seeing really growing right now. Can AI help all of us in terms of working better, working smarter, working faster around clients? Sure. But do I want to have people sitting in my office, flesh and blood, that I'm working? I don't want to replace employees
Of
because
course.
I can be using, AI and be more efficient in running my company. And that's kind of the personal aspect. I mean, listen, these things, are,
Yeah.
ruining society. I think I just heard, Gary V talking about, we're going back to an analog. We're going back to the 1800s society. Like, people are getting so overwhelmed by technology and AI that there's going to be this level set where we're going to go back to the way it used to be. Where I was recently in a new business pitch last week, and we were at this brand, and we were at the reception area, and there were these yellow manila inner office envelopes. And one of my colleagues, who's worked for me for 11 years, didn't know what that was.
Oh, wow.
And I had to tell her, I said, when I started in my career, there were no phones, mobile phones, there were no computers. Like, you literally typed an inner office memorandum, you put it in a yellow envelope, you wrote the person's name on it, and the mailroom person would come by in the cart and collect them and take them to all the different floors of the building you worked on. She's like, "Are you kidding me?" And I was
That's
like,
so funny you say that, because when I was at the UFC as an intern in global partnerships, one of my jobs was, hey, go take this over to finance, or go take
what
this
did I
over.
tell you? Like, the biggest, thing you hear about the sports industry is, I started in the mail room at CAA. That's where that comes from, before. And I got to admit, part of the interaction is the personal interaction,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%.
And all of that went away. And listen, I have 3 adult kids all out of college. I'm an empty nester, but the way they grew up with technology and computers and mobile phones, like, is completely different than, the way I grew up. And there's a difference. And I just think it's becoming overwhelming. And the thing I love about the sports business, it's, dude, just look at, the USA hockey game yesterday, and the celebrations around the world at bars and, youth leagues. And, that's the power of the sports business. And, you could have all the AI and technology you want, but, I think that's, is why the sports industry is so great to work in. And, can it help? Yeah. But should it replace people? I don't think so.
I know, I totally agree. Again, if I could, I'd go back to a flip phone, because I'm 36, and I grew up a time when, like, I got my first cell phone when I was, I don't know, freshman in high school, but it was one of those, like, Nokia. I just used it because I had to catch the bus, and I would call my mom and say, "Hey, I'm on my way home." But I mean, iPhone came out my senior year of high school, so it was nice to not have. I feel like millennials, we think a lot of things, but I think one of the things that we take pride in is we were kind of the last of the generations to, we still played outside, and we still, had relations, and we still had to talk to people, and couldn't go to somewhere and just sit in the corner on your,
Yeah.
on your iPhone, right? And
Listen, if I was in my office today, I'm a quasi hoarder a little bit, but I have a plastic bag with every mobile phone that I've ever had in my career that is just in the bottom of a drawer, that when I get a new phone, I just throw it in. I didn't recycle them. My first one, when I was at ISI, was the size of a brick.
The big block one? Yeah, right.
So,
Did
you
those
know,
work well?
listen, technology is great.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. Technology is changing every industry around the world, mainly for the better. But you can't replace the personal interaction, between people, in order to get business done, So, but not that I'm anti-technology. I love technology. I have a lot of great technology clients, and that's, makes it fun. But the personal interaction of this industry is why I love what I do.
Yeah. No, that's great. And look, as we're wrapping up, and again, Eric, I appreciate you being so generous with your time and so generous with, with myself, and love all the anecdotes and stories that you have. I mean, for somebody listening right now that wants to get in the sports business, maybe as early in their career, is there a rule on the wall for someone trying to, you know, stay in the sports business, win in the sports business, and ultimately have this as their career? What's something that you would tell a 25-year-old that's saying, "Hey, I really love this business. It's tough, but what would you say to that 25-year-old?"
I mean, listen, I grew up playing sports, loving sports as a kid. I knew that it was something that I wanted to do, even if I didn't know how I was ever going to do it. And to me, it's about having the drive, the grit, and the determination. And when I got my opportunity at the WWF, I was sitting in a cube, and I had a person on the right side of me, a person on the left side of me in another cube, and a person behind me in a cube. And all I said to myself is, I'm going to outwork all of them. And if there's only one cube left in this row, I'm going to be the person sitting in it. And that was just, maybe it was part of my athletic mentality, but I just grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, loving sports, and figured, man, if I'm ever lucky enough to make a career working in sports, how cool would that be? My dream was always to play in the NFL. Obviously, I got through college, wasn't good enough to make it to the NFL. But my thesis in grad school was, well, if I'm not good enough to play in the NFL, I wanted to make a living off the people who were good enough. So that's what I kind of wrote my thesis on, which is why I really started, studying the sports marketing industry. And back in the late 80s, it was a lot different than it is today. I think because I got in early, I've been able to see a lot of the growth of the industry. But now the opportunities are so much bigger than they were when I started, that, you just got to have the drive. And, as I taught my 3 kids, I don't care what you do in life, just pick something that you're passionate about. And if you're passionate about it, you'll never work a day in your life. And I sit here, almost 40 years into my career, and I feel like every day I go to the office is a new day. It's exciting. I never know the phone call or the email or the text message I'm going to get about a new opportunity. And I just love what I do. So it's not really work. Makes it easy.
There you go. Well, that was another episode of The Playbook here with Eric Bechtel, CEO of IdeaQuest. Eric, thanks again so much for joining, and can't wait to see those new big deals that you get coming up.
Go grab your snowshoes and come out to Jersey, my friend. Do some shoveling. Thanks for having me. It's been an honor, Taylor.